Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the three-dimensional frequency. I sit here in front of you today as a force to be reckoned with. Time and time again, I've sat in front of an audience so large, so great, and so grand, within the multidimensional lifespan of my soul's journey, within the quantum realm itself. Every time I sit in front of an audience to deliver a message so true, so grand, that rings so true to the ears and delivers much needed frequencies of ascension energies to a frequency so dense, so diverse, so dark in scale, so tranquilizing in its energies, such as the energies of the three-dimensional frequency that we're in right now. Because in this moment, as I sit in front of an audience of the Earth's frequency, of the frequency that we sit in, a three-dimensional frequency so dense, so clear, so light, so diverse are the energies that rest upon Mother Gaia, that the inhabitants who live upon her can decide according to their own free will which frequency that they would rather rest on in a certain moment in time. As reality itself is made up of layers upon layers of pockets of realities in which each fractaled soul has the free will to enter into, to jump into, to migrate into, to migrate out of, to tap into, and to tap out of at any specific moment in time. What I'm talking about is the concept of timelines. Timelines themselves do not shift. Timelines themselves are so multidimensional that they stay in a cohesive, coherent spot in a layer of an energetic field so great and so grand that the timelines that rest upon this energetic field are timeless, limitless, so multidimensionally wide, quarantined within this field of energy that I speak of. Yet, within its quarantine state, you, my friend, have the freedom to jump into a different timeline of sorts that you would much rather prefer to experience in a certain moment in time, in a certain lifetime, in a certain value of being. As values are so great, they can never be measured. Values are so dense that you can never tell what they truly are in a certain moment in time when you've decided to shift into a different state of being within an alternate timeline, within an immediate timeline, within a neighboring timeline, within a timeline stacked upon a timeline of sorts, within a high frequency timeline, within a low frequency timeline, within a timeline that I can explain to you only as timelines shall be explained, as timelines stay stabilized within the energetic frequency of all timelines, of timelines being a definite answer that you seek in a moment when you're seeking an awareness so great and so grand, when you're seeking an experience so diverse and so wise, so wide in scale, so small in fractals. As these timelines are so great and so grand, so many multiples of timelines can never be counted. As counting timelines that are limitless, that are projected into a reality field so great and so grand, in the multitude of different realities that could ever take place amongst the infinite amounts of soul fractals that ever existed out in the multiverse, out in the quantum realm. These timelines that I speak of are infinite, are multidimensionally infinite as is, as they stay stationary within their energetic layer, within their very own energetic layer of being. It is you, my friend, who is able to jump timelines at your free will, upon your understanding of how timelines actually work. How they work is something that I've never had to explain to any single being or society ever before. But as I sit here within this three-dimensional frequency during the time of ascension energies that will be creeping up on a society that is so unsuspecting, that have no idea how timelines work and how timelines can be shifted. I find myself needing to explain this concept as an entirety of a whole, for an entirety of a whole of a civilization, of a generation so great, so wide, so grand, to come to an understanding, a final understanding of a finalized timeline that we are about to step into as an entirety of a whole. As timelines cannot be shifted, but they can, however, be created by God's consciousness itself. As timelines are vast, as timelines are great, as timelines are never-endingly swift, and timelines are ever-endingly slow. Any timeline in a perceived moment, any timeline in a perceived shift in reality cannot be foretold and cannot be noticed by a singular entity or a singular soul sitting within the three-dimensional frequency. As your consciousness is as wide as a spectacle of being in a moment of time, when you require your consciousness to be as broad as the universe itself. It's a conundrum you see. You, on a singular level of a being, can never understand the concept of timelines until I explain to you the concept of the universe, of the universes, of the multiverse, of galactic history so wide and so broad and so extreme in its nature that the story cannot be told within one video itself. As the inception of timelines is an interesting story that God should tell once God is ready to deliver the story to a civilization, to a being, to a unity consciousness that has been shifting in between these timelines for generations and eons of evolutionary feats, that has been jumping between millions and billions and endless amounts of cycles of timelines within each representation of a minute, of a being, of a fractal, of a minute detail in a time of cohesiveness, in a non-time of reverse engineering, in a unity consciousness as a whole of what is. Our timelines are endless. Our timelines can be perceived as no timeline at all. It is a big conundrum that is hard to explain in a moment in time when the entirety of a unity consciousness of a society is about to shift itself into the consciousness of a singular perspective, into a being of a momentary awakening of sorts, of a society as a whole shifting into a five-dimensional frequency, so dense, so light, so differentiated in the way that it used to be, in a moment in time when all timelines collapse back into one, a singularity of a timeline that has been designed and blueprinted and delivered into a frequency so great and so grand that it shall forever be noticed, be called, be referred to as the five-dimensional frequency timeline of all timelines. Within this timeline itself that I speak of, there will be pure joy, pure love, pure unity consciousness of the soul, an entirety of a soul that can only be as great and as grand as God's consciousness itself. As God's consciousness used to be, will be, shall ever be, a part of the fractal souls that you are, that your neighbors are. God's consciousness has never left you and will never leave you and has always been a part of you for as long as you shall remember and for as long as you shall not remember, as you've forgotten when you dropped into this three-dimensional frequency that is so dense, so airy, and so light. As you're playing along with the game, to participate in this game of life upon death, upon life, upon death, upon rebirth, upon reincarnation cycles that never ever end, you would have had to shift in a state of amnesia. The amnesia that you're suffering is an endless state of hopelessness, of despair, of fractals dispersed in a quantumverse so wide in scale, so minute in peculiarity, that at the end of the nights, at the end of each night, at the end of the lifespan of a fractal soul, within a fractal soul, within a fractal soul's singular lifespan, the soul itself she'll shift back into a timeline of unity consciousness, to shift back once again into a timeline of a perspective that is on a singular level of all levels, in between lifetimes, after each lifetime, during each lifetime, and the cycle continues and continues as this timeline is ready to shift back into the timeline of all of perception, of all of unity consciousness, of all of a perceived whole that has never left our being as a society, as a whole, as a part of unity consciousness, as a part of the all that we are so integrally a part of. This timeline itself has been in existence for eons and eons, even before the creation of the quantum realm. It has been a timeline so great, and it was a timeline so massive, so permanent, so distinguished, so much so as it is the multidimensional timeline of source consciousness itself. The never-ending pockets of life within this quantumverse, within this universe, above this quantumverse, above our galaxies, above the angelic realm, above all that there is, that have been created within other pockets that they exist in by other parts of fractal pieces of God's consciousness that we cannot have access to, and we do not have access to. As ladies and gentlemen, our existence is within our particular quantum realm. But outside of our quantum realm is a world that we would love to explore, is a world that is unexplorable, is a world that is in existence, but is a world that is so massive in weight, so grand in scale, so minute in detail, so everlasting in its persistence of its being, that I cannot begin to tell you the type of world that we will be looking at once we rise up above the angelic realm and into the realm of God consciousness itself, and above that into the realm outside of God's consciousness, outside of the fractal of our God's consciousness, into the fractal, into the being, into the pocket of the much larger and greater and grander God's consciousness that our God's consciousness fractaled off from. And so you see, it is a conundrum of sorts, a conundrum that's never ending, that can never be perceived, that can never be described in a singular lifetime, in a singular soul's fractal, in a singular quantum realm of experiences. Our experiences and the lessons learned here are the experiences that will stay with us for lifetimes to come, for eons and eons of evolutionary feats. And it will stay with source consciousness as a part of the whole. As each and every fractal part of the whole counts towards the entirety of the whole. But ladies and gentlemen, above our world of the quantum realm is an entirety of a whole that I cannot describe to you, as in this moment in time, it is so massive in scale, so diverse in weight, so permanent in its permanence. It folds upon layers and layers of energetic fields that is ever so expanding into a night of a consciousness so great and so grand, that above it all, we can never see the truth. We can only witness the truth as we merge back into this consciousness that is so great and so grand at the end of the exploration of our quantum realm. At the end of a journey that has taken us to many precipices of times, of experiences, of lessons learned, of discovery of the self that we shall never ever forget, and we shall forever attain and retain as that of the discovery of the one true self that we've always been, that source consciousness has always been a part of, that source consciousness has never left, that your consciousness has never left within this endless cycle of life and death and rebirth, and cycles of reincarnation cycles that never ever end on a macro scale, on a micro scale. The scales are so diverse. On a macro scale, you will find endlessness at one end of the scale, and endless amounts of bigger and broader and wider, and an endless amount of layers and layers of consciousnesses, of God's consciousness, of source consciousness, of unity consciousness above each layer as you swim up to the surface, to the next layer, to the next layer, and to the layer above that, as God itself is so massive, so great, and so grand in scale that we cannot perceive the entirety of it all. We cannot perceive the entirety of a situation that is limitless, that is endless, that is so entirely encompassing of who we are and who we will never be and who we shall always be, is a situation of a conundrum of sorts. How can you deliver? How can you describe? How can you soak up the realization that our reality is endless? Because endlessness is hard for our little brains to perceive. The concept of endlessness is a concept that I shall forever fathom as a concept of an impossibility of sorts to ever perceive. Because being without an end is a conundrum of sorts. How can you come to a point of realization where you realize that you are an endless multidimensional being, that fractaled from a larger fractal of a being that is so wide, of a being that is so great and so grand, of a being that is all-encompassing of God's consciousness itself, that you yourself are a part of God's consciousness, and you've never left that being to begin with? How can you encompass the idea of a fractal so big and so grand living within your body, within your energetic field, that merges into a bigger fractal, even bigger and even grander, as that fractal was always a part of you, which makes you the ultimate grandness in scale of a fractal that there ever was, that there ever is, and there ever will be. And even above that, upon layers and layers of fractaling of source's consciousness, the ladder never ends. The sky is the limit, and the sky is the limit. As our being, besides the multidimensional aspect of it, is endless, is limitless. Words cannot describe to you the concept of what limitless really means when it comes to the concept of unity consciousness, of source consciousness itself. And that is the meaning of this existence, that we get to fractal off into a new perspective, into a new lifetime, into a new lesson of sorts, to discover into the darkness of that which we are not, to come into the light as we climb up this ladder, to once and for all realize and come into a perception, to perceive and realize and decide as a singular structure, as a singular entity, as a societal structure, as the entirety of a whole, that the darkness is not what we're really truly made up of. That the game that we're playing, that has been a projection all along, will eventually push us up into a consciousness so great and so grand once we learn all of our lessons, once we come into the realization of what we truly are. Once we experience a multitude of dimensional frequencies within the dimensional frequencies of our being, that is endless, that is limitless. And so you see, layers and layers, we go all the way to the top of what is. If there was such a thing as the top of what is, as what I'm about to describe to you is a concept that cannot be perceived, is a concept that is so great and so grand that words themselves can't describe what this reality is really about, how this reality is really structured, how this structure truly really works within the multidimensional aspects of our quantumverse, of a unity consciousness so great and so grand that the layers are endless, that the frequencies have no beginning in sight and no ending that can be perceived. How can you describe such an aspect of the being, of your being, of my being, of the being of the entire whole, of all that we are not, and all that has never left us? It is a true conundrum that within this lifetime, I won't ever be able to perceive as an entirety of the whole. It's so big and so grand, we won't ever be able to know as an entirety of the whole, that of which we really are, as an entirety of the whole, because we are so limitless and we are so endless. And words can't describe how limitless and endless God truly is as God itself is a concept of sorts, a concept of never-ending energies, a concept of ever-expanding consciousness throughout a night so dark, throughout a morning so bright, throughout a pocket so diverse in frequencies, throughout a multitude amounts of pockets that never ever end, in a time-space conundrum, in a frequency conundrum of sorts that I can never explain to you, as these pockets of life, these pockets of air, these pockets of reality, these pockets of quantum realms are endless, diverse, structurally different. No two quantum realms are the same in nature, are the same in blueprint, are the same in its design, are the same in its fractal of a source consciousness that is so great and so grand and so big, as we can't perceive the entirety of the all, of all that it is, of all that we are, as a whole entirety of who we are. These quantum realms themselves were designed to hold pockets of life, pockets of experiences, of existence, of oxygen, of oxygenated experiences upon experiences of experiences, of galactic life, of never-ending fractals of souls, of never-ending lessons in a night so dark, in a morning so bright, of never-ending cycles, of reincarnation cycles that teach us the lessons that we so crave, that we so yearn to learn, as the blueprint of God itself was, is, and will always be that of the darkness and the lightness. And in this moment in time, as I'm describing to you the nature of reality itself, the one thing that I can truly say in confidence is the nature of God. The nature of a God so great and so grand, that is everlastingly perceived as the ultimate singular entity within all of existence. If existence had an all, if existence had a unity consciousness so great and so grand that all cannot and would not be a word to describe the entirety of the all, that is endless, that is limitless, that is never ending, that is ever reaching. In a moment in time, as I sit here to try and verbalize the entirety of the all, the extremities of the concepts of our reality fields above our quantum realm, I struggle to find words to say to a civilization, to a population, to a world so deep within the darkness of one pocket, of one quantum realm, of one three-dimensional layer within a quantum realm itself, that has fractaled so far off from the initial consciousness being of Source itself to have these experiences, to learn these lessons of forgetfulness, of regretfulness, of illusions upon layers of illusions, of delusions that we shall once and for all wake up to within the next 2.5 years. Within the next 2.5 to 3 years will be the greatest and grandest timeline shift of our perceived being within our quantum realm. Within this timeline shift, we will jump into a place so differentiated, so great, so grand, that within our quantum realm, it would be a place that we haven't ever been to, as an entire unity of a consciousness so great and so grand within our quantum realm prepares to shift into a timeline, the timeline of all timelines that God has designed on a blueprint level to encompass, to withhold, to behold all of the frequencies of unity consciousness as is. As each fractal, one by one, decides to join this timeline, holds the capacity to step into this timeline, sheds of all of the distortions and illusions of self, to finally be able to become an accomplice to shift into this timeline. All of reality as a whole will finally see, will finally perceive, finally feel, finally live, and finally join in with our brothers and sisters of other galactic races within our Quantumverse that we've so been separated from within eons and eons of evolutionary feats, the three-dimensional frequency has been an awful one, has been a wonderful one, has been one filled with much lust, much desire to shift into a darkness so great, into a darkness so grand, that we've allowed the darkness to encompass our being as identification of who we are. But ladies and gentlemen, as I sit here today to speak to you about the nature of our reality and the nature of this timeline that we are about to step into, that we're about to shift into, that has been pre-designed and predestined for an entirety of a civilization of a three-dimensional frequency to rest in, to labor in, to love in, to feel peace in, to encompass in all of its entirety. I can confidently say to you that we've made it. We've made it to a point, in a place, in a civilization, in a layer of a three-dimensional frequency, in a quantum realm of all layers of God's frequency, of all quantum realms that have ever existed, of all of the layers and layers of energetic fields out there above our quantum realm. We've made it to a point of unity consciousness, of a consciousness so great and so grand, at the cusp, at the end, at the level that we perceive to be an entirety of the whole, at the end of a journey that has been so arduous, so long, so tranquilizing, so speedy, so much so of all that we are, encompasses this journey that our soul has been on for eons and eons of evolutionary feats. We are ready, finally, to step into the energy of home, of wholeness, of unity, as we step back into the bosom of God. As we step back into the bosom of God consciousness, as we retract each piece of ourselves back into a whole so great and so grand that belongs to the entirety of another whole, as this whole that fractaled off from the consciousness of God, as this whole that fractaled off as God's consciousness itself, as this whole that fractaled off and endless amounts of fractaled off parts of God's consciousness itself, as you, my friend, you, the singular you that is sitting on your couch listening to my transmission, the singular you that is floating around in my energy field, in the concepts of what is, you are and will always be a part of God's consciousness that is so great and so grand that you shall always be perceived as God itself.